Imagine a future where healthcare is a team sport, truly a team sport. A future where we've redefined the healthcare system from a collection of brick and mortar buildings and clinics and departmental silos to one that's defined by the patient, their provider, and all the people in between who support their care. A future where that's possible because care teams are equipped and even empowered to connect and collaborate with one another across silos. Deliver the latest advances in patient care further and faster, all consistent with all the great themes we're talking about here today. Can you imagine it? Because I believe that in order to live the rich, full, healthy lives we all deserve, we can't have that unless our health systems are healthy. And so I'd like to share a story of a glimpse of one model in one system that's beginning to do just that. And it's not going to be featured on the cover of Wired or Becker's or Fast Company, but it's rapidly accelerating frontline innovation from care team to patient, and not in years, but in months, and in some cases weeks. And it's not going to be in a place you expect. But first, I'm going to share 4 brief stories just to frame the journey today. A story of invention and how a French physician became the father of thoracic medicine, to a story of culture and how a rank-and-file developer changed the face of email communication, to what reality television might be able to show us about collaboration in healthcare, and then finally, the government, and how one of the largest health systems is actually embracing principles from each of these stories to serve those who serve. So the year was 1816. Physicians at the time had very few diagnostic instruments or methods available to them. One common practice, rather, at the time was the practice of percussion, tapping on a patient's chest to attempt to hear sounds, the breathing signs. Now, one physician, Dr. René Laennec, at the time had difficulty assessing a female patient's condition, and he was also uncomfortable with the other common practice of the time, which would have been placing his ear and his head firmly into the female patient's chest. So at that discomfort, he decided to do something else. He rolled up a piece of paper, put it up against the patient's chest. What he heard was remarkable, and voila, the stethoscope was born. Now, while the stethoscope would go on to evolve over the years thanks to René and contributions from his colleagues, the fact that one situation between a patient, a physician, and a piece of paper would then lead René to coin many other clinical terms and conditions like pneumonia and emphysema. And in fact, if you Google doctor today, right, it's a fun exercise, I did it before the conference, you'll get some 1 billion results. You'll also get nearly 1 billion images of a stethoscope, right? Because it still remains one of the most iconic representations of the medical profession and of that of a physician. But again, it all started between one physician, one patient, a piece of paper, and an uncomfortable encounter. For me, talk about an early example of everyday innovation being possible anywhere, on any day, by anyone, and underscoring those themes that are so cherished here, where every voice truly does matter. The question then becomes, though, are we making it possible to hear those voices in healthcare? Right, so fast forward to 2001, Gmail, it's a ubiquitous tool. It's a ubiquitous tool, billion users strong, certainly one of Google's signature products. But what's surprising is it wasn't developed as a result of a product development roadmap or strategic plan or even from Google's founders. It was developed by a rank-and-file developer who had permission to innovate. You see, at the time, Google had an 80-20 policy where 80% of your time was to be focused on core projects and core assignments, but the other 20% could be focused on any project of that employee's choosing with anyone in the company. So, in fact, Gmail actually came out of this 20%, and many of Google's other signature products also were born because of this 20%. Which raises the question of, if you create that culture, certainly something we're all familiar with here, if you create that culture, then innovation can truly flourish. And in the case of Google and Gmail, heck, it was hardwired into their DNA, into their job description. Which brings us to reality television, believe it or not. What can reality television possibly teach us about collaboration? And more importantly, can innovation truly flourish on the set of a reality TV show? Well, what's interesting about Shark Tank is, yes, it has all the hallmarks of a reality TV show, cult classic for some, budding entrepreneurs and innovators coupled with self-made millionaires and billionaires. Sounds pretty exciting and juicy. But beyond the sweaty palms and the 2-minute pitches is another story, in my opinion, where subject matter experts are brought together with everyday problem solvers who are looking for innovative solutions to common problems that can actually touch and reach people across the country. Now, yes, to be more profitable for some as well, but the other story here is that if you notice, in Shark Tank, not every idea is great. Not every idea gets a green light, but only by shining a light on possible solutions to a problem do they identify the right solution. And then they take it a step further after the show. They align resources and mentorship and coaching and an entire approach to make sure that that solution is scaled, not over decades, not over years, but as quickly as possible. And so the question then becomes, okay, we talk invention, we talk culture, we talk collaboration, story of the stethoscope, Gmail, even Shark Tank. You know, the obvious question is, what does this mean to those of us focused on driving change in healthcare? I guess the question is, so what? Well, let's face it. As we all know, we could use the help in healthcare. Because if it seems to you that new evidence-based clinical practices take entirely too long to get across a system, to actually move from lab to bedside and touch a patient, you're right. I mean, while this was published in 2001, the fact is we haven't really accelerated that process very much. And 17 years is entirely too long, I think we could all agree. And in fact, when you consider that in 1961, John F. Kennedy announced to Congress and country that we'd send a man to the moon, right? July 20th, 1969, man landed on the moon. 8 years later. So I know it's a broad comparison here, but essentially we can send a man to the moon in half the time that we can take new evidence-based clinical practice and take them to a patient. So it's not necessarily because the systems and the providers aren't trying. It's not all their fault. I mean, the incoming flood of data is only going to make that more difficult, right? I mean, outgoing CEO Toby Cosgrove identifies this as medical knowledge soon doubling every 73 days, essentially 800,000 papers every single year in over 5,600 medical journals. We all know this, we see this, but really what that means is that's 2,000 different insights, different publications every single day. So all this setup, the question is, there's got to be a better way, right? And so, in fact, there is, at least we're starting to see it take shape. It's by no means a panacea, but we're starting to see it take shape in a place that certainly many of us may not expect. And that brings us back full circle to our fourth and final story, which is the story of the government, and specifically, yes, the Department of Veterans Affairs, or the VA. And this is where I became a part of this journey back in 2014, just to take you back a little bit. 2014 was the year of Ebola, and it was also the year of crisis for the organization, as many of us have likely heard or seen in one way or another. But as part of that crisis in 2014 came new clarity, new leadership, and a new focus. A focus on really enabling a different type of healthcare experience for patients by making sure that the people who touch them every day are better equipped, better enabled, and almost empowered to coordinate that care. So, like any good assessment, we came into this knowing that you can't drive change and truly impact patient care from the top down. This is an org chart, right? Could be any org chart, could be service lines, could be any organization. Well, we also realized pretty quickly thereafter is you can't even drive change just from the bottom up. Now, what we found is that true change happens in the white space. It happens across silos. It happens horizontally across service lines, even across clinics, and in this case, across geographies. And just to unpack that a bit, what does that mean? The VA has a lot of white space. Right? If you consider that the VA operates across more than 2,000 locations, so 350,000 dedicated men and women who every day provide care for the lives of over 9 million patients. That's 95 million outpatient visits a year. That's a big number, right? It's a Fortune 10 company, only this Fortune 10 company isn't Walmart, and its product isn't at everyday low prices. It's caring for the health and the well-being of our nation's most deserved heroes. And so what do we do? right? All of these stories, these principles that we've just touched on, well, what they actually did was bring principles from each of those. The story of invention is really about making sure that every voice on the care team matters, is heard, and there's a way to actually identify and galvanize that across the care process. It's about culture, moving from a very siloed, very fragmented approach to one where care teams were actually equipped and encouraged to connect and communicate with each other, and not just by thought alone, but by an actual system to support that at a large scale. So let's give you a concrete example. So what did we do? We started with, of course, our very own Shark Tank initially. The VA actually went out, and this inaugural Shark Tank saw not billionaires and millionaires, but frontline nurses and care teams and caregivers coming together to actually solve some of the biggest moonshot problems. So what you're seeing here is a pitch video again, but what's cool is not that this is a nurse posting a video online. No, this is one nurse in one clinic, in one hospital, in Boston, who's laying out a blueprint for how to combat the 8th leading cause of death in the United States, influenza leading to pneumania, with a solution that in their clinic had reduced that by over 70%. 70%. And what's remarkable about that is that in the years prior to shining a light on this solution, she'd been working hard, her team had been working hard to spread that to other clinics, even in their region. And it spread to a few, 2. But after this initial approach, what we found was that a slide that should autoplay that's not would actually show you the spread of this one solution, not across just a few facilities, but 100 different hospitals over the course of 12 months. 100 different hospitals. Now, it didn't just happen all organically. There was a system behind that. There was alignment of resources. There was a multidisciplinary team, not just of leadership, but of frontline peers across the country. And this actually popped up here. And then there was also technology, of course, but not just creating another tool for a clinician to have to juggle, but instead applying some of the common technology we use in our everyday lives, the power of something like a Google-like search, predictive analytics, the ability to actually, when you're a part of a community, have the power of a recommendation engine that you see with Amazon, right? So if you're a musculoskeletal specialist in La Jolla, California, working on a residency, you can identify and connect with others across the country and start to solve some of the same problems, and in a way that wasn't building a better mousetrap, but by coordinating across all the tools that clinicians already have to juggle, which sounds pretty incredible considering how many they juggle, right? So this has served as the connective tissue, if you will, behind the initiative. And from there, this worked as well. The question is, if you build it, will they come, right? Clinicians are so busy, time is a 4-letter word. What we found was actually that the opposite was true. When we freed teams from working in the freed teams from their silos rather, enabled them to work in the white space, the results were incredible. 125,000 frontline providers, administrators, benefits leaders coming together, all to solve the challenges that they each have a role to play, right? So the question then becomes, at that point, is what moonshot issue could be solved next with everyday innovation by frontline providers who are working and touching patients every day? So let's take you back to the Ebola timeframe, back to 2014, access to that care. So in the old world, there's a benefits change process that requires a veteran service representative to work through a 6,000-page manual, right, to issue one change for a veteran claim. Now, all the while, that veteran is awaiting access to the system and access to the benefits that they've so rightly deserved and earned. And in the old world, it took 9 months for that process to take place. And in the meantime, none of those stakeholders were actually able to connect and talk to one another. So changes were being made without consulting with frontline comp and pen docs who are actually administering the exam. And that's not unique to the VA, right, in terms of that disconnect. But by bringing them all together into a actual collaborative, safe, secure collaborative environment, what we found was that process went down to 1 month. 1 month, which is still not good enough, but since that 1 month, it's now down to a matter of weeks. And now we're starting to see relationships forming between benefits administrators, frontline doctors, that certainly didn't exist before in the silos that everyone resided. So I've given you 2 examples. A few other quick examples here is that we've been able to take this approach into really all the core issues facing many healthcare systems. In the field of mental health, we've seen increases in identifying at-risk veterans. And we say 35% here, but the percentages don't do justice to the fact that every single one of those percentage points is a veteran, is a patient. And in the one clinic where this was initially piloted, that resulted in almost 350 different patients in 1 year. That's almost a patient a day that they're identifying at high risk for suicide. I mean, that's truly engaging and changing a patient's life. We've had the same in primary care wait times and also in rehospitalizations, but really the take from this is that we're naming a few examples here. These are a few examples of over 300 different equally important initiatives that have been launched across the system since this Shark Tank concept first took off, since this approach to collaboration for the frontline care team was first implemented. Frankly, the VA is just scratching the surface on what's possible, and with that in mind, the question becomes, what's great about Medicine X is it really does underscore some of the themes we just talked about here. The power of one voice, and how when every voice is represented, and every voice matters, and every voice is connected, we can drive true innovation. So the question is, in line with the spirit of the day, is how might we start to apply some of these principles in other health systems, in our own clinics, for our own patients, back at home in our own communities, right? If we're able to do that, how might healthcare be different? And how soon before we start to realize the healthcare of tomorrow, today? With that, I thank you very much.